Loretta Parsons was pretty sure she was the last soul on Earth. For 3 years, ever since the fever took her Jedediah, her world had shrunk down to this dusty, wind-scoured patch of Wyoming. The silence was a living thing, a constant companion that whispered of everything she'd lost. Tonight, though, the silence was gone. A storm had ripped open the sky, and the wind didn't just howl, it shrieked, clawing at the walls of her little ranch house like a hungry beast. Loretta sat at her kitchen table, the lamplight flickering, making the shadows dance like devils on the walls. She was nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee when she heard it. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the rain, it was a sound that didn't belong. A low, splintering groan from the barn, the sound of old wood giving way. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Rustlers. Jedediah had always said desperation made men bold, and a storm like this was the perfect cover. She grabbed the heavy Winchester rifle from its hooks by the door. The cold steel was a grim, familiar comfort. She pulled on Jedediah's old coat, the faint scent of him, leather and tobacco and earth, wrapping around her like a ghost. The walk to the barn was a war against the wind. Rain lashed her face, cold as ice. The barn door, always barred, was hanging open, swinging on a single hinge. Fear, sharp and cold, pricked at her skin. She slipped inside, her boots sinking into wet hay. The air was thick with the familiar smell of horses and leather, but tonight something else was mixed in, the coppery metallic tang of fresh blood. "Who's in here?" she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. She raised the rifle. "Show yourself." The only answer was the drumming of rain on the roof. She lifted her lantern higher, its light cutting a swath through the gloom. It slid over hay bales, old harnesses, and then it found them. Huddled in a corner was a man, his body shielding a small child. He was Lakota. His face was etched with pain, his hair matted with blood from a gash on his temple. His buckskin shirt was dark and stiff with it, but it was his eyes that locked her in place. They were fierce, defiant, and full of a fire that even his agony couldn't put out. The child, a little girl no older than 5, peeked out from his arm, her eyes huge pools of terror. She was clutching a small, carved wooden bird. For a heartbeat, Loretta froze. Every campfire story, every whispered rumor about savages and raids screamed at her. Her first instinct, born of fear and a lifetime of prejudice, was to pull the trigger. End the threat before it could touch her. Her knuckles were bone white on the rifle stock, but the man didn't move. He just watched her, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. He held the child tighter, a silent plea that was also a warning. Then the little girl let out a tiny, frightened whimper. That sound cut straight through the storm and into Loretta's hollowed-out heart. It shattered her fear. This wasn't a monster from a story. This was a man bleeding to death in her barn, and a terrified child who had seen too much. Slowly, deliberately, Loretta lowered the barrel of the Winchester. "You're hurt," she said, her voice a whisper. "You're hurt bad." The man gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He hadn't come as a threat. He had come for sanctuary. Her lonely, quiet life had just exploded. The decision she made in that moment would change everything. "All right," she sighed, her breath a white cloud in the cold air. "All right, let's get you out of this storm." Getting him to the house was a nightmare. He leaned on her, taller than he looked, each step a grunt of pure agony. The little girl trailed behind, her small hand clutching Loretta's coat. Inside, Loretta guided him to the worn settee by the hearth. He collapsed onto it with a groan, his face pale and slick with rain and sweat. "Stay with him," she told the little girl, who just stared, her face unreadable. Loretta worked with grim efficiency. She stoked the fire, fetched her medical box, and heated water on the stove. "I need to see the wound," she said, her voice flat to hide the tremor in her hands. He watched her, his dark eyes gauging her, before giving a slow nod. She carefully cut away the sodden buckskin. The wound was ugly, a deep, ragged gash high on his ribs. And then she saw it. This wasn't a bullet hole. It was a knife wound. Vicious. Deep. Someone had tried to kill him up close. But that wasn't the strangest part. The wound had been stitched before, with what looked like sinew. But the stitches had torn open. Someone had tried to save his life, and then something had gone horribly wrong. "This needs cleaning," she said. "It's going to hurt." "It hurts now," he rasped. It was the first time he'd spoken to her. His voice was low and gravelly, but what shocked her was his English. It was perfect. Unaccented. For the next hour she worked in silence, cleaning and stitching the wound with clean gut thread. He never cried out, but a sheen of sweat covered his brow. The little girl watched from a corner, a silent shadow clutching her wooden bird. "Who did this to you?" Loretta asked quietly, not looking up from her work. He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice low and hard. "Men who mistake the law for their own greed." The cryptic answer hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. This was no simple drifter. Loretta finished bandaging his side and brewed a bitter tea from willow bark. "My name is Loretta Parsons," she said, finally meeting his gaze. "I am Kalen Blackwater," he answered. "And this is my daughter, Mina." "She's hungry," Kalen said softly. "We have not eaten since yesterday morning." The simple, fatherly statement cut through her remaining defenses. She pulled out dried jerky and cornbread. Mina waited for a nod from her father before she began to eat, her small hands breaking off pieces with a starved urgency. As the storm outside quieted to a gentle drum of rain, Kalen drifted into a feverish sleep. Loretta sat by the hearth, the Winchester now resting against the wall. She studied his face. In sleep, it had lost its harshness. It was the face of a leader, a thinker, and a target. Her mind raced. Men who mistake the law for their own greed. What did that mean? And by taking him in, whose enemy had she become? Later that night, a small touch on her hand startled her. It was Mina. The little girl silently held out the small carved bird. It was an eagle, its wings carved with loving detail. An offering. A thank you. Loretta's throat tightened. "It's beautiful," she whispered. As Mina curled up on a blanket near her father, Loretta turned the wooden eagle over in her hand. Her fingers traced the smooth lines of the carving. Then she felt it. On the underside of one wing, nearly invisible in the dim light, was a small burned-in mark. A brand. It was a circle with a bar through the middle. A cold dread washed over her. She knew that brand. Every rancher in the territory knew that brand. It was the mark of the Strickland Cattle Company. The mark of Josiah Strickland, the wealthiest, most powerful man in Redemption Gulch. Why was a Lakota child carrying a toy with Strickland's brand on it? The man bleeding on her settee wasn't just running from nameless enemies. He was tangled up with the most dangerous man she knew. And now, so was she. 2 days passed in a tense, quiet rhythm. The storm broke, leaving the world washed clean. Kalen's fever broke too. He was weak, but his strength was slowly returning. He spoke little, his words carefully chosen. Mina, however, began to thaw, a silent little shadow following Loretta around the cabin. On the third morning, Loretta knew she couldn't put it off any longer. Her supplies were almost gone. She had to go to Redemption Gulch. "It is not safe," Kalen said, his body tense. "Safer than starving," she retorted. "No one ever comes out this way." "Be careful who you speak to," he warned, his voice low. The ears of snakes are low to the ground. The ride to town was treacherous, the path a river of mud. Redemption Gulch was a single dusty street of raw, unpainted buildings. It was a town that felt temporary, a place where civilization hadn't quite taken root. Loretta tied her horse outside Higgins's general store, feeling like the secret she was keeping was written all over her face. "Loretta Parsons!" Martha Higgins called from behind the counter. Her eyes missed nothing. "Haven't seen you since before the storm." "The roof held," Loretta said, forcing a smile. "Just need some flour and coffee." As Martha weighed out the flour, she leaned in conspiratorially. "Have you heard the news? The whole town's in an uproar." "I don't hear much news my way." "It's about the stagecoach robbery 2 days back, during the storm," Martha whispered. "They say a band of savages hit it, killed the driver and guard, made off with a federal lockbox full of papers." Loretta's blood ran cold. A robbery, during the storm. "What kind of papers?" "No one's saying, but Josiah Strickland's put up a reward. He's furious." Before Loretta could process this, Martha's eyes gleamed with fresh gossip. "And that's not even the half of it. We're supposed to get a new mayor, appointed by the governor. Supposed to be here 3 days ago. Rode out from Fort Laramie with his daughter, but never arrived. A man and his daughter. Coincidence?" "Sheriff Brody thinks he ran into trouble," Martha went on. "But between you and me, I think the trouble found him. Especially since Strickland was dead set against the appointment." "Who is he?" Loretta asked, her voice tight. "That's the craziest part," Martha scoffed. "He's an Indian, a Lakota man, educated back east. Name's Kalen Blackwater." The floor seemed to drop out from under her. Kalen Blackwater, stagecoach robber, or missing mayor. Her hand trembled as she reached for the sack of flour. Just then, the bell on the door jingled. Josiah Strickland himself strode in. He was handsome in a way that set your teeth on edge, dressed in a tailored suit that didn't belong in the dusty store. His smile never reached his cold, calculating eyes. "Mrs. Parsons," he said, his voice smooth as oiled leather. "A pleasure. I trust you weathered the storm." "All is well, Mr. Strickland," Loretta said, her heart hammering. "Good, good," he said, his gaze lingering on her a moment too long. "These are dangerous times, especially with these murdering thieves about. The sheriff is forming a posse. If you see anything unusual out your way, anything at all, you'll let me or Sheriff Brody know, won't you?" It wasn't a request. It was a command. He was fishing. Loretta felt a surge of protective fury. She met his gaze, her expression a mask of weary indifference. "My property is quiet as a grave, Mr. Strickland. Always is." His smile tightened for a fraction of a second. "Of course. By the way," he added, his voice casual, "one of the items stolen from that stage was a child's toy, a little wooden eagle. It was a gift for my niece. Carried my brand. If you should happen to see it." He let the sentence hang in the air, a silken threat. Loretta felt the blood drain from her face. The bird, the brand. It wasn't a toy he'd made. It was stolen. She paid for her goods, her hands moving like a sleepwalker's, and fled the store. Her mind was reeling. Kalen's words echoed in her head. Men who mistake the law for their own greed. It all clicked into a horrifying picture. Strickland didn't want a federally appointed Lakota mayor interfering with his power. He owned this town. He probably owned the sheriff. So he'd sent men to ambush Kalen on the trail. But that wasn't enough. He'd also robbed a stagecoach and was pinning it on Kalen to make sure that even if he survived the ambush, he'd be a wanted criminal. The toy eagle wasn't just a toy. It was the evidence Strickland had planted to frame him. As she mounted her horse, Strickland's voice cut through the air from the store's porch. Oh, and Mrs. Parsons. She turned to look at him. That posse I mentioned, he said with his cold smile. They ride out toward your ranch first thing in the morning, just to be thorough. He had just signed her death warrant. She had less than 24 hours. Loretta galloped home, the world a blur of terror and fury. When she burst into the cabin, Kalen was standing by the window. He turned, his dark eyes immediately reading the panic on her face. "There is trouble in your eyes," he said. "Trouble?" she cried, slamming the sack of supplies on the table. "They're not just looking for a missing mayor in town. They're looking for a stagecoach robber. And Josiah Strickland seems to think you're both." She told him everything. The robbery, the stolen lockbox, the lie about the wooden eagle with his brand. Kalen's face was a stone mask, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "He is more clever than I thought. He creates a crime to hide his crime. He's sending a posse to my ranch in the morning, Kalen. A posse. He knows. He was toying with me, threatening me." She paced the small room, a caged animal. "Why didn't you tell me everything? You let me believe you were just a victim." "To tell you the truth would have been to place a weapon in your hand," Kalen said, his voice low and even. "One Strickland could have turned against you. I did not know if you were a friend to men like him." "And what do you think now?" she demanded, stopping to face him. He took a step closer, his gaze intense. "I think you're a woman who lowers a rifle when she sees a child, who tends the wounds of an enemy, and who faces down Josiah Strickland in his own town to protect a secret. I think you are a stronger ally than I could have ever hoped for." His words disarmed her. The anger drained away, leaving only the cold weight of their reality. "What are we going to do?" she whispered. "He'll find you here." "Which is why the governor sent me," Kalen said. "The railroad is coming. It will cut through land promised to my people. Strickland means to steal that land. I was sent to stop him." He paused, his eyes dark with memory. "He sent 3 men to meet me on the trail, not with a welcome, but with knives. One of them was a deputy sheriff." Loretta stared at him, horrified. A lawman. The conspiracy went deeper than she imagined. The sheriff couldn't be trusted. The whole town was a snake pit. "They were not trying to warn me away," Kalen continued. "They were trying to make sure I never arrived. I fought them off, but they killed my horse and took my satchel, the satchel with my official papers." So Strickland had the proof of who Kalen was. He was burying it, along with Kalen's reputation. "He won't stop," Loretta said, her voice hard with resolve. "He won't stop until he knows you're dead." "I know," Kalen agreed. "Hiding here is no longer an option." Just then, Mina, who had been listening silently, spoke. "Papa," she said, her small voice clear as a bell. "The bad men didn't take everything." Kalen looked at his daughter, confused. Mina walked over to the worn settee. She reached deep into a tear in the upholstery. When her hand came back out, she was holding a single, folded piece of oilskin. Kalen took it, his eyes widening as he unfolded it. "When they attacked," he breathed, "I slipped this from the satchel. I hid it here while you were sleeping." It was a single page from his official appointment. But not just any page. It was the one detailing the specific articles of the Fort Laramie Treaty he was there to enforce, concerning the railroad right-of-way. And at the bottom, clear as day, was the signature of the territorial governor. It was their only weapon, their only proof. "We have to get this to someone," Loretta said, her mind racing. "Someone who can't be bought." "There is no one," Kalen said grimly. Suddenly the sound of hoofbeats shattered the quiet. Not one rider. Many. Loretta ran to the window. "It's them," she breathed, her voice tight with panic. "Strickland's men. It's not morning. They're here now." "Mina, the root cellar," Kalen commanded in a low, firm voice. "Now. Do not make a sound." The girl slipped through the trap door without a word. Kalen grabbed the Winchester. "You will greet them," he said, his voice a calm rock in her sea of fear. "You are a lonely widow. You know nothing. You have seen nothing. I will be in the bedroom. Do not let them inside." He disappeared into the shadows of the other room, just as the riders pulled up, their horses churning the damp earth. Loretta took a deep, shuddering breath and opened the door. The man in the lead was Pike, Strickland's foreman. A big, barrel-chested brute with small, mean eyes. He spat a stream of tobacco juice near her porch steps. "Afternoon, Mrs. Parsons. Mr. Strickland sent us. He's worried about you. Wanted us to check if you've had any unwelcome visitors." His eyes roamed her property, lingering on the barn, the house. He was hunting. "As I told Mr. Strickland, everything is quiet," Loretta said, her voice turning to ice. "We'd just like a look around, ma'am," another rider said, his tone slick and menacing. "For your safety." "That won't be necessary," Loretta said. Pike's expression hardened. He swung down from his horse, his spurs jingling. "Mr. Strickland doesn't like loose ends," he said, his voice a low threat. "And he really doesn't like being lied to." He stepped onto the porch. "Now we're going to have a look inside that little house of yours." That was the line. Fear instantly crystallized into cold rage. She took a step back, her hand closing around the cool stock of the Winchester she'd propped just inside the door. "You take one more step," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "and you'll be pulling back a bloody stump where your foot used to be." Pike stopped, surprised. Then he smirked. "Feisty," he sneered. "I like feisty." He lunged for the door. In that split second, the bedroom door flew open. Kalen was there, a silhouette against the dim interior. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding the small wooden eagle. "The lady asked you to leave," Kalen said, his voice calm and chilling. Pike and his men froze, their jaws slack with shock. Then Pike's shock morphed into a triumphant, cruel grin. "Well, well, well. Look what the storm dragged in. We've been looking all over for you, Blackwater." His hand dropped to the pistol on his hip. Before he could clear leather, Kalen moved. He threw the wooden eagle, not as a weapon, but as a distraction. As Pike's eyes flickered, Kalen lunged, slamming his shoulder into Pike's chest. Pike roared as he stumbled backward off the porch, landing hard in the mud. Kalen was on him in an instant, a knee on his throat, twisting his gun hand until the pistol dropped. The other two riders scrambled for their weapons. But Loretta was already there, the Winchester at her shoulder, the hammer clicking back with the sound of a coffin nail. "Don't even think about it," she snarled. The men froze. They were hired muscle, not soldiers. This wasn't worth dying for. "Get off me," Pike choked. Kalen leaned in, his voice a lethal whisper. "You will ride back to your master and tell him you found nothing. If you ever set foot on this land again, I will not be so merciful." He stood, grabbing Pike's pistol from the mud. Pike staggered to his feet, his face a mask of humiliation and rage. He glared at Loretta, a silent promise of vengeance in his eyes. Then he and his men galloped away. Loretta's arms began to shake, adrenaline leaving her weak. She lowered the rifle. Kalen stood beside her, tucking Pike's pistol into his waistband. "They will be back," she said, her voice trembling. "Yes," Kalen agreed, "but not today." He swayed, his hand going to his side. Loretta saw the dark stain spreading across the fresh bandage. His wound had reopened. He was worse off than before. He looked at her, his eyes grim. "We have shown our hand. Strickland will not send thugs next time. He will send an army." The violent clash with Pike left them with no illusions. The cabin was a trap. Time was a luxury they no longer had. Kalen, weakened by his reopened wound, slumped into a chair, his face pale with pain. "They know," Loretta whispered, staring out the window as if she could still see the dust from Pike's horses. "They know for sure now." "Which means we must act tonight," Kalen said, his voice strained. "Your plan to go to town is too dangerous. They'll be watching for you. So we just wait for them to come back and burn us out." "No," Kalen said. He looked down at the precious document in his hand, the page signed by the governor. "This must get to Sheriff Brody, but you cannot be the one to deliver it." "Then who?" Loretta asked in exasperation. Kalen stared into the fire for a long moment. "When you were a girl," he said slowly, "was there a place you would go to be alone? A place no one else knew?" A memory surfaced. "There's an old trapper's cabin, deep in the cottonwood grove by the creek, miles from here. No one's been there in years. The path is overgrown." "Good," Kalen said. He took a piece of charcoal from the hearth, and on a scrap of wrapping paper he drew a crude map. "Tonight, under the cover of darkness, you will ride there. You will leave this document and a message for the sheriff." "A message? How will he even know to look for it?" A dangerous light glinted in Kalen's eyes. "Because I will make sure he does. While you are riding to the cabin, I will pay a visit to Redemption Gulch." Loretta stared at him, aghast. "You can't. You're hurt. They'll shoot you on sight." "They will not see me," he said with absolute certainty. "I will move as a shadow. I will not go into the town itself, just to the edge. The livery stable." He paused, a grim plan forming on his face. "A small fire, a distraction. It will bring the sheriff out of his office. While he is occupied, a single arrow will find its way to his door. This map will be attached to it." It was an insane, desperate gambit, but it was better than waiting for the end to come to them. It forced Brody's hand, forcing him to meet them on neutral ground, away from Strickland's prying eyes. "It's insane," Loretta whispered, but she knew it was their only chance. They prepared in silence. Loretta packed a satchel. Kalen checked the pistol he'd taken from Pike and armed himself with a hunting bow from his satchel, a weapon she hadn't known he possessed. Before they left, he knelt before Mina. He spoke to her in the soft, flowing cadence of Lakota, reassuring her, promising her. He kissed her forehead. "She will stay here," he told Loretta. "In the root cellar. She knows how to hide. She will be safer than either of us." Loretta knelt down, her heart aching for the small, brave girl. "We'll be back before sunrise," she promised. Mina nodded and pressed the wooden eagle into Loretta's hand. "For luck," the child whispered. They left under a sliver of moon. Loretta rode west toward the creek, while Kalen, a dark phantom, melted into the eastern darkness toward the distant glow of Redemption Gulch. The ride was an exercise in terror. Every shadow held a threat. She found the dilapidated trapper's cabin and hid the document inside an old tin box. In the dirt floor, she wrote a simple message. "The law has arrived. JB, a direct call to Sheriff Jedediah Brody's honor." As she wrote back, a faint orange glow flickered on the eastern horizon. The distraction. Kalen was there. A desperate prayer formed on her lips. She arrived at the cabin just as dawn was breaking. The house was dark and silent. Kalen was not there. Panic seized her. He was caught. Or dead. She had sent him to his death. She sank into a chair, the weight of their failed plan crushing her. The sun was just cresting the horizon when the door opened without a sound. Kalen slipped inside. He was covered in dust, his face drawn with exhaustion, but he was unharmed. He gave her a single sharp nod. "It is done," he whispered. "The fire was set. The arrow delivered. Now we wait." They waited. The morning stretched into an eternity. Every hour felt like a nail in their coffin. Had Brodie ignored the map? Had he taken it straight to Strickland? Just after noon, a single rider appeared in the distance, following the winding path of the creek. An old man slouched in the saddle. It was Sheriff Brodie. He was alone. Loretta and Kaelin watched from the window as he dismounted near the cottonwood grove. Hope, fragile but fierce, ignited in Loretta's chest. He disappeared inside the trees, following the map. He was gone for what felt like forever. When he emerged, he wasn't riding back to town. He was riding directly toward the cabin. But he wasn't alone anymore. Following him were two other riders. Loretta's heart sank. It was a trap. Brodie had brought a posse. "Get Mina," Kaelin said, grabbing the Winchester. "Go out the back. Run for the creek." But as the riders got closer, Loretta saw something that made her freeze. The man riding beside Brodie wasn't one of Strickland's thugs. He was older, with a weathered face, and the other. He was a boy, no older than 16. Both were armed, but they didn't look like a posse. They looked nervous. "Wait," Loretta said, putting a hand on Kaelin's arm. Brodie rode into the yard and stopped, holding up his hand in a sign of peace. Kaelin met him outside, Loretta on the porch, a silent sentinel. "This is Sam and his boy, Corey," the old sheriff said, his voice weary. "They run a way station a day's ride from here. They're the ones who found you after Strickland's men left you for dead." Loretta and Kaelin stared, stunned. "We patched you up best we could," Sam said, his voice rough. "Thought you were a goner. We were tracking you, worried you wouldn't make it, but the storm washed out your trail." The sinew stitches. It wasn't a doctor. It was a simple station owner who had tried to help a stranger. "I didn't bring them here," Brodie continued, his gaze hard. "They found me on the trail. Said they saw the fire last night and came looking for answers. They told me everything they saw." So Brodie had witnesses. The ground was shifting under Strickland's feet. "It's authentic," Brodie said, holding up the governor's document he'd retrieved from the cabin. "But it's not enough. Strickland's called a town meeting for this afternoon at the saloon. He's using the stagecoach robbery and your disappearance to declare a state of emergency. He's going to use it to form a town council and seize total control." The old sheriff looked Kaelin square in the eye. "I've spent 10 years letting that man run my town, no more." He spat on the ground. "I will uphold the law. What's your play, Blackwater?" "We will be there," Kaelin said, his voice resolute. "This has to end in the open, for all to see." "The saloon will be packed with his men," Brodie warned. "Then they will bear witness to his fall," Kaelin replied. The die was cast. Preparations were swift. Kaelin insisted on bringing Mina. He wanted the town to see not just a warrior, but a father. Loretta, armed with Pike's pistol, rode beside them, with Brodie and his newfound witnesses bringing up the rear. They were no longer hiding. They were a small, defiant army riding to reclaim a town. They skirted the edge of Redemption Gulch, the raucous noise of the meeting growing louder. Dismounting behind the livery, they moved toward the saloon. Kaelin handed Mina into Loretta's care. "Stay by the back door," he said, his eyes conveying a world of trust. "Be ready." Then he strode to the front of the building and pushed through the swinging doors. The saloon fell into a stunned, cavernous silence. Josiah Strickland was standing on a crate, mid-sentence. "And with this tragedy, it is our solemn duty to form a council to protect—" His voice trailed off, his face draining of color as he stared at the man he had twice tried to have killed. Kaelin walked into the center of the room. "Your concern for my well-being is touching, Mr. Strickland." Kaelin's voice cut through the stillness, calm and laced with iron. "But as you can see, your men failed. collective gasp went through the crowd. Strickland recovered, his face twisting into a sneer. "This is an imposter, a savage fugitive from the stagecoach robbery. Seize him!" Pike, his face a mask of hatred, was the first to move, his hand dropping to his gun. But before he could draw, Sheriff Brodie stepped forward, his own Colt seeming to leap into his hand. "Hold it, Pike!" Brodie's voice boomed with an authority no one had heard in years. He held up the official document. "This is Mayor Kalen Blackwater, appointed by the territorial governor. He represents the law, and I am sworn to uphold it." "He's a liar and a murderer!" Strickland screamed, losing control. "No!" a voice called out from the doorway. It was Sam, the way station owner. "The only murderers I see are the ones who work for you, Strickland. I saw them. They left this man for dead on the trail." The crowd murmured, their loyalty swaying. They saw Strickland's fury, Kalen's calm strength, and the undeniable resolve of their own sheriff. "The law," Strickland spat, his composure cracking. "This is my town." "No," Kalen stated, his voice resonating with finality. "This is a town of laws, and your rule of greed and murder ends now." That was too much for Pike. Blinded by rage, he ignored the sheriff. "No Indian tells me what to do," he roared, pulling his pistol. A single deafening shot echoed through the saloon. Sheriff Brodie stood, smoke curling from his barrel, as Pike staggered back and collapsed, his dead eyes staring at the ceiling. Chaos erupted. Strickland, panicking, made a desperate lunge for a shotgun behind the bar. He never reached it. Kalen crossed the space in a blur, grabbing Strickland and slamming him against the bar with enough force to splinter the wood. The fight went out of the cattle baron in an instant. Seeing their leader subdued and their foreman dead, the rest of Strickland's men dropped their weapons. It was over. But just as a tense quiet settled over the room, the doors burst open again. It wasn't more of Strickland's men. It was a uniformed officer of the United States Cavalry, followed by a dozen armed troopers. "What in God's name is going on here?" the captain demanded, his eyes taking in the scene. The dead man on the floor, Strickland pinned against the bar, and the armed Lakota man standing over him. Strickland saw his chance. "Captain! Thank God! Arrest this man!" he screamed. "He's the leader of the savages who robbed the stage. He's trying to start an uprising." The captain's eyes narrowed, his hand resting on his saber. For a moment, it seemed the victory would be stolen from them. But then, Loretta stepped out of the shadows by the back door, holding Mina's hand. "That's a lie," Loretta said, her voice ringing with a newfound strength that made every head turn. "I am Loretta Parsons. I own the ranch west of here. Josiah Strickland sent his men to my home. They tried to force their way in to kill this man. They are the lawless ones." The captain looked from Loretta's fierce, honest face to Strickland's sputtering rage. He was undecided. Then little Mina, who had been silent through it all, stepped forward. She held up the small wooden eagle. She didn't look at the captain. She pointed a tiny, trembling finger straight at the most powerful man in the territory. "He killed my horse," she said, her voice small but clear, "and his bad men tried to kill my papa." That simple, childish truth cut through all the lies in politics. It was the final, undeniable piece of evidence. The captain looked at Strickland, then at Kalen, then at the sheriff. He nodded. "Sheriff," the captain said, his voice clipped and official, "take this man into custody. He'll be transported to Fort Laramie to await a federal marshal." With Strickland in irons, a new air settled over Redemption Gulch. It was the clean, fresh air that follows a violent storm. Mayor Blackwater, with Sheriff Brodie as his firm right hand, began the slow work of building a town on a foundation of law, not fear. A week later, Kalen and Mina rode out to Loretta's ranch. The prairie was quiet, peaceful. Mina ran to Loretta, pressing the wooden eagle back into her hand. "You should keep it," Kalen said, dismounting. "It seems to bring you luck." A small, genuine smile touched his face. He looked at her, his gaze direct and warm. "The new town council has approved its first contract to supply provisions for the mayor's and sheriff's offices. The contract is yours, Loretta, if you'll have it." Loretta's heart swelled. It wasn't just business. It was a partnership, a new beginning. "I'll have it," she said softly. They stood together, the lonely widow and the hunted mayor, watching the setting sun bleed across the vast Wyoming sky. Their lives had been irrevocably entwined by a storm, and now they were the architects of a fragile peace, their shared future as wide and full of promise as the horizon before them. The story of Loretta Parsons and Mayor Kalen Blackwater became a legend in the tapestry of the West. It's a tale of how courage can be found in the most unexpected places, and how two people from different worlds can come together to forge a new future from the ashes of greed and prejudice. Their journey reminds us that a single act of compassion can change the course of history, and that true strength isn't about the power you hold over others, but the alliances you build and the justice you fight for. What did you think of Loretta's incredible bravery? Did Sheriff Broady's final stand surprise you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of unlikely heroes and Wild West justice captured your imagination, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves a great story. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next tale from the untamed heart of the American West.